So look at Anthony Ryder from South Lyon, Michigan, recently selected as the Lions 2020 Fan of the Year. He has a passion about sports broadcasting.
With the 112th selection in the 2021 NFL Draft, the Detroit Lions select Amon-Ra St. Brown, wide receiver, USC. One pride, baby! Yeah! What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another Detroit Lions video. The Detroit Lions are 5-2. They are going into week 8 of the NFL season atop of the NFC North, the number 2 seed in the NFC conference, and looking to improve to 6-2, extending their lead at both positions. The Detroit Lions are coming off of a very disappointing loss this past week as they unfortunately traveled to Baltimore and fell in a very embarrassing fashion, 38-6, at the hands of the now 5-2 Baltimore Ravens. But their opponent this week had a very similar outcome in week 7 as the Las Vegas Raiders traveled to the Chicago Bears, who are now currently just 2-5 and suffered a very embarrassing loss to their backup quarterback to a score of 30-12. Both teams are arguably the two most embarrassed coming out of week 7, arguably the two worst losing teams of week 7 of the NFL season. Matchup on Monday Night Football this week, both looking to bounce back, with the Lions looking to improve to 6-2 and the Las Vegas Raiders looking to get to 500 on the season and take firm control of that second place spot in the AFC West. So let's take a look at these two teams, take a look at how they match up versus one another, and take a look at who should be the victor on Monday night and which team is going to bounce back after a very tough loss a week ago. So let's start off with the Detroit Lions. After stumbling quite a bit in Baltimore, a lot of their statistics have dropped. A lot of their game averages have dropped, including pretty majorly their points scored and their passing defense, but their offensive stats regressed a little bit too. They are currently now only the 4th best passing offense in the NFL, still a top 5 passing offense, and still a very, very strong offense at that. Jared Goff did have an off day, but I wouldn't even say was horrible in a horrible game versus the Baltimore Ravens. He was more just kind of an average quarterback performance versus a really, really good defense. The rushing offense did take a step back in the absence of David Montgomery versus a top 10 rushing defense in Baltimore, currently sitting at 11th in the NFL, and they went from the 4th scoring offense to the 8th scoring offense, as last week they did only score 6 points, only scored 1 touchdown, and obviously that is going to take you from a top 5 scoring offense down to not a top 5 scoring offense anymore. Defensively, they are regressing a little bit more week by week as they now currently rank as the 27th passing defense in the NFL, but they still sit atop the NFL as the 2nd best rushing defense. Even a week ago, the rushing defense was pretty average. They didn't allow Gus Edwards over 70 yards, and they didn't allow Baltimore's rushing attack to really be that impactful. Problem being, their passing attack was really, really impactful. And then their scoring defense went from, I believe it was about 15th, 16th in the NFL, all the way down to 19th this week. They gave up 38 points to the Baltimore Ravens, which again is going to hurt your overall season averages quite a lot. However, compared to their opponents this week, they still look pretty good and pretty favorable, as the Las Vegas Raiders sit pretty bottom of the league in most categories. Offensively, they are not a bad passing offense, although they are slightly below average. They currently rank as the 18th passing offense, but a large part of that is due to the fact that they have had Jimmy Garoppolo play quarterback for some games. They then went to Aiden O'Connell for a few games, and last week they started a 3rd-string quarterback, and he, of course, did not have a very good day passing versus the Chicago Bears. So that passing offense is a little bit deflated due to injuries. I do think they have a lot of good weapons through the air, obviously Devontae Adams, Jacoby Myers, and even Michael Mayer, but their passing offense hasn't really been able to put a whole lot of things together unless Jimmy Garoppolo is the starting quarterback. If the backups are in, the passing offense really, really struggles, as you would expect. As far as a rushing offense, they currently rank as the 32nd, the very worst rushing offense in the NFL. Despite having last year's leading rusher in Josh Jacobs, they are not running the ball particularly well at all. They have not rushed for 100 yards as a team in a single game this season, and going up against the 2nd best run defense in the NFL, the Lions should very much win this matchup and should be able to stop the Raiders on the ground, just like they did last week and just like they've done for a majority of the season. They should be able to stop the Raiders running game, putting a lot of pressure on Jimmy Garoppolo in his first start back or on the backup quarterback if Jimmy G is for some reason unable to go and they want to wait another week on him. The Raiders also rank as just the 30th ranked scoring offense in the NFL. They haven't put up very many points. I believe they have scored 30 points just one time in the NFL season, and they really haven't been able to put up very many points. Again, that's going to happen when throughout 7 games, you have 3 different starting quarterbacks taking snaps and 3 different quarterbacks starting through 7 different games. Defensively, they are a little bit better. Their passing defense is actually quite good, ranking 9th in the NFL as far as yards per game, but the rest of their defense, not so much. Outside of Max Crosby, that defensive line and linebacking core is very subpar, ranking them as just the 24th rushing defense in the NFL and the 22nd scoring defense in the NFL. They really haven't had too many great games, but the great games they have had have come against the Denver Broncos and the Green Bay Packers, 2 teams of which do not have the highest flying or highest scoring offenses. Now, taking a look at matchups this week, the Lions match up much more favorably this week than they did a week ago, where the Baltimore Ravens were really good across the board at every single position and had stars. The Las Vegas Raiders have 2 or 3 stars and a lot of players that probably wouldn't be on the Detroit Lions roster, certainly wouldn't be starting for the Detroit Lions roster. Their offensive line versus defensive line should be no contest. The Detroit Lions are a very, very strong offensive line. And last week, they did have a little bit of a down week. There was a lot of exotic blitzes. There was a lot of pass rush situations. And the Baltimore Ravens got home 5 times. However, before that, the Detroit Lions did not give up very many pressures or sacks throughout the previous 6 games. And I don't expect them to give up very many pressures or sacks to the Raiders defensive line outside of Max Crosby. If they're able to shut him down and they're able to keep him away from Jared Goff, the passing offense should be pretty successful, and the offensive line should look back to their winning ways. The wide receivers are also pretty favorable in this matchup. I think Amon-Ra St. Brown, I think, is better than any defensive back that the Las Vegas Raiders have. I think Jameson Williams is going to outspeed and be faster than a lot of their defensive backs. Khalif Raymond is obviously really good. Josh Reynolds is obviously really good. And then you have a little bit farther down the line, you have guys like Antoine Green. And I do believe they will elevate Dylan Drummond this week as well, who was a preseason and camp standout throughout the Detroit Lions preseason process. So I do think that the wide receivers are going to outclass the defensive backs, as well as our running backs being better than linebackers. Jahmyr Gibbs had over 100 total purpose yards last week versus Patrick Queen and Roquan Smith, arguably the best linebacker duo in the NFL and arguably a top 5 linebacker duo in the NFL. This week, he's facing Divine Diablo and a couple other linebackers that aren't really top of the NFL in any statistical categories. The linebacking matchup this week is significantly easier than the last couple of weeks. Jahmyr Gibbs had 100 total scrimmage yards last week. I expect another big game out of Jahmyr Gibbs here, as well as Sam Laporta. Sam Laporta has gone up versus Roquan Smith and Levante David in back-to-back weeks and still had about 4 receptions for a decent amount of yardage and a couple first downs in each of those matchups. This week, again, he's going up against a significantly less talented linebacking core, and I do think they'll be able to take advantage. With Jared Goff still being a top 5 quarterback as far as passing yards and easily a top 10 statistical quarterback this year, the Lions offense should be able to put up quite a few points, and they should be able to put themselves in a position to win from the offensive side of the ball. They have a lot more depth than the Las Vegas Raiders, and outside of 1 or 2 players, the Vegas defense really doesn't have too much to write home about. Now, on offense, they are a little bit different. On offense, I do think they have a couple matchups that are favorable, but still, I don't think that they are necessarily the most talented defense. Much like their defense, they have a couple stars on offense, right? They have Josh Jacobs, who this year is having a down year, but last year was the league leading rusher. You have Devontae Adams, easily a top 10 wide receiver in football, probably a top 5 wide receiver in football, and Jacoby Myers, I would argue, is a top 5 wide receiver too in the NFL this season. But outside of that, they really don't have anybody, right? Michael Mayer has really yet to break out and really prove himself as a top tight end in the NFL, despite being a highly drafted and highly touted prospect. Their offensive line has been okay, but hasn't been great. The rushing attack hasn't been very good this year. And of course, Jimmy Garoppolo is kind of the definition of a bridge service quarterback where, yeah, he's going to be okay. He's going to get you a couple wins. He's going to get you a couple losses, and you're probably going to finish around a 500 record with Jimmy Garoppolo at quarterback. Now, the offensive line, I think, is not quite as talented as the Detroit Lions defensive line. As a defensive line, the Detroit Lions lead the NFL in pressures with 159 through 7 games. That leads them to be the #1 pass rush in the NFL in terms of pressures per game, and leads them to be one of the most disruptive defensive lines in football. Josh Pascal returned a week ago, and even though he didn't record a sack, he was pretty disruptive and did force Lamar Jackson out of the pocket several times. Unfortunately, Lamar Jackson looked like an MVP contender, and the Lions weren't able to corral him, but they were able to even get some disruption and some pressure versus a very, very strong Baltimore Ravens defensive line. Again, the Las Vegas Raiders defensive line is not nearly as strong as the Ravens, is not nearly as strong as Tampa Bay's, so the Lions should be able to get some pressures, and hopefully Aiden Hutchinson and Josh Pascal can get home from the edges, and Aleem McNeil can work his way up through the middle and create some pressure and havoc there. Wide receivers versus defensive backs, I do think that the Raiders have a huge advantage here, right? Especially if Jerry Jacobs can't go for a second week in a row. Devontae Adams and Jacoby Myers matched up versus Will Harris will not end well for the Detroit Lions. I don't know if they're going to want to sub up Stephon Gilmore like last week. I don't know if they're going to want to replace it with Khalil Dorsey, who's having a little bit more who's found a little bit more success over Will Harris on the boundary. I don't know. Hopefully, obviously, Jerry Jacobs is healthy, but they're going to have to find a way to contend with 2 really, really good wide receivers, because as good as Cam Sutton is, his counterpart on the other boundary hasn't been playing well in the absence of Jerry Jacobs, right? That is where Baltimore found a lot of success, is targeting 25 on deep shots, and that's where they got a lot of receiving yards. That's where Lamar found a lot of success, and where they really looked to target was Will Harris on the boundary. So even if Jerry Jacobs is healthy, I still think I give this to the Las Vegas Raiders. Devontae Adams is a top 5 receiver in all of football. Jacoby Myers is a top 5 wide receiver too in all of football. They are going to match up very well versus the Detroit Lions secondary, which is why it is very important for the Detroit Lions pass rush to get home early and create a lot of havoc so that Jimmy Garoppolo can't find those wide receivers for big chunk plays. Now, running backs and tight ends versus linebackers, I think the Detroit Lions have the advantage here. Obviously, if Josh Jacobs returns to form, if Josh Jacobs turns into the leading rusher that he was a season ago, they could have a big problem. However, if he doesn't, I do think if he plays the way he's been playing the rest of the season, I do think this advantage goes to the linebackers. They are a huge reason why the Detroit Lions are the 2nd best rushing defense in the NFL, and they should be able to stop the 32nd ranked rushing offense in the NFL. And as far as tight ends go, the Detroit Lions struggled very early with tight ends in the regular season. And last week they gave up multiple touchdowns to Mark Andrews. However, the Raiders really aren't using Michael Mayer too often, and I do think on a rookie versus rookie matchup after 2 back-to-back weeks where the tight ends have kind of created some separation, or really a whole season where tight ends have been able to take advantage, I do think Michael Mayer is potentially one of the easier matchups that Jack Campbell and Alex Anzalone are going to have to face this week, or this year even, and I do think they'll be able to take advantage. As I said, I think the Vegas offense is not a bad offense, but I do think it has some holes due to the big contracts, right? I do think Devontae Adams is going to be very hard to stop. Jacoby Myers will be very difficult to contain, and Josh Jacobs is really, really talented, so though that big 3 trio could give the Detroit Lions some problems. However, as of right now, it does seem like the rushing attack isn't quite as good as the Vegas Raiders would want, and of course, we do have a couple decent secondary members of our own. Hopefully, Cam Sutton can do his best and hold Devontae Adams to at least an average game as opposed to an astounding game. Now, keys to victory for both sides. I think the Detroit Lions have to get pass rush, and the scheme on defense has to be better. I know a lot of people are looking at Aaron Glenn saying, oh, but he's done so well with this Detroit Lions defense, and obviously, like I said in the beginning, the stats are a little bit skewed, right? After the Baltimore game, the stats are a little skewed. They're a little bit lower than they would be on average. And before that game, they were top 10 in a lot of statistical categories. However, Aaron Glenn did regress a little bit into that old mindset of off-man coverage, right? Bailing really early, not really allowing the wide receivers to press and be physical. And although it's going to be tough to be physical versus guys like Devontae Adams, I think it's still something that they need to do. They cannot allow these wide receivers to get free releases. They cannot allow Devontae Adams to have 5, 6, 7 yards of cushion on a 3rd and 9, right? It's never going to work. And especially if you have guys like Jerry Jacobs out there who's pretty good at press coverage. You guys have guys like Cam Sutton out there who's pretty good at press coverage. You should be able to at least disrupt them at the defensive line and not give free releases, not give so much cushion, and just play a little bit closer, a little bit tighter man than we saw last week versus the Baltimore Ravens. And then, of course, running the football. As high scoring as this Detroit Lions offense is, as high flying and how good the passing offense is, this offense truly goes through the run game. The offense succeeds more when David Montgomery is successful than when he is not. When David Montgomery has great games, this offense looks elite. When David Montgomery has average or below average games, this offense can struggle at times. And the same goes for Jahmyr Gibbs, right? Jahmyr Gibbs didn't have a whole lot going in the first half versus Baltimore. The offense did not score a point. Jahmyr Gibbs looked a little bit better in the second half versus Baltimore, and the offense looked better and even scored a touchdown. The offense goes as the running backs go. As high flying as it is, as good as the passing offense is, as good as Jared Goff and Amon-Ra St. Brown and Sam Laporta and Josh Reynolds are, this offense succeeds as far as the running backs will take them. So they need a big game out of Jahmyr Gibbs and to a lesser extent Craig Reynolds to really find success versus the Las Vegas Raiders. On the flip side, the Las Vegas Raiders need to find a successful game plan for Josh Jacobs. Right? They have 3 wins on the season. 3 of them have come from the top 3 rushing performances of the Vegas offense. They rushed for 93 yards versus the Packers and got a victory. That is their best rushing performance of the year. And the week after that, I believe they had 85 rushing yards and got another victory there. Their top 2 performances this year, as far as points scored and victories, come from the 2 games where they have ran the ball for the most amount of yards and the most efficiently. That is how Vegas wins, is they run the ball and then they play action to their big-time wide receivers. If Josh Jacobs has a big game, he will put the Raiders in a position to win and put them in a favorable position offensively, whereas the Detroit Lions need to stop that. They got to involve their wide receivers, right? As I've mentioned several times, they have super talented wide receivers. Jacoby Myers and Devontae Adams are a really, really good 1-2 combo, probably a top 5 wide receiver duo in the NFL, and the Lions have to find a way to stop that. And then, of course, stop the run from the Detroit side, right? As Detroit looks to run the ball a lot, as they look to involve Jahmyr Gibbs and have him be the engine of that offense in the absence of David Montgomery, the Raiders are going to have to look to stop it. I don't know if Max Crosby is going to have to do that from the edge. I don't know if the linebackers are going to have to step up and make plays and shoot the gaps, but if the Raiders want a chance to win this game, they are going to have to stop the run because that is going to stall the Detroit Lions offense more times than not. Overall, I think the Detroit Lions will bounce back in this game. I think they are a more talented football team. I think they are a severely better coached football team. I think that's the biggest downfall of the Las Vegas Raiders is their coaching staff. I think the Lions are significantly better coached. I think they are slightly more talented and certainly more talented as far as depth goes. And I think they will bounce back. I think they'll score 31. I think they will win by 11 points, but I don't think this is going to be a blowout necessarily. I think the end score might be a little bit deceiving. I do think the Raiders will stick around for a while in this game. I do think that they will be within arm's reach of a tie game or even winning this game at points in times, but I do think the Lions will have a consistent lead throughout the game. I do think Vegas will keep it close. They're going to continue to fight, but at the end of the day, the running game is going to wear them down. They're going to be able to put up points on a not great Raiders defense outside of Max Crosby, and I think they're going to be able to put up points and walk away with a pretty significant 11-point victory over the 3-4 Las Vegas Raiders. I think Jahmyr Gibbs has to have a big day on the ground. I think the pass rush has to return, and the Lions are going to return to 6-2. With all that being said, that is all I have for you guys today. That is my Week 8 preview of the Detroit Lions. We will take a look probably tomorrow or maybe in a couple days about the injury report and who looks to play and who looks to sit out. But until then, that is all I have for you guys today. Thank you all so much for watching, and until next time, and as always, go Lions.